Blaze Radio Network.
And now, the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show.
Welcome, everybody, to the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show, where I, your rabbi, reveal how the world really works. Just got a letter from Sam, who wrote me saying that for the last few weeks on this show, he feels that I've been over-focusing on the F of faith. And he says, could you please go back to some of the other Fs? And Sam, I wrote back to and said that yes, indeed, and that this show that you are now listening to is going to be much more about family. However, the reality remains that if you have read carefully the ebook that you can download for free from my website, rabbidaniellapin.com, then you would have a clearer understanding of how family and finances and fitness and friendships all do tie into faith as well. In fact, all 5 Fs are interlinked with one another. I actually recommended that you went through the exercise of drawing a circle and then marking 5 equidistant spots on the circle. And, of course, it goes without saying that they'll be 72 degrees apart. And then on each one of those 5 places, write down one of the 5 Fs. And then draw straight lines connecting each one to the other. And you'll see the diagram that will result will be a very effective schematic, really, of how all the 5 Fs are connected with one another. But still, let's go on, shall we, to today's topic already. And today's topic is stimulated because of a letter I received. And I did answer because the person who wrote, Jennifer, is a member of the Happy Warriors community. I responded to her and asked her if it was okay if I did the main discussion that her letter stimulates on the air on the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show that you're currently listening to. And Jennifer said yes. And here is her letter. It really resonated with me. I totally got it, and I was very pleased because it launched a topic that I feel really does need a little bit of thinking. It's not going to be for each and every one of you, but I dare say that each and every one of you knows somebody for whom this is very important information. Here's her letter. Dear Rabbi, I have followed the advice of your books on money, and my financial life was transformed by your ideas. Now I'm back to you for another of the 5 Fs. I have dated more than my fair share of selfish, impulsive jerks. But I'm dating a guy right now, and I just don't know. ... By the way, Jennifer is 27. And now her letter continues. My parents think he is a really nice guy, and he is. But there is something inside me causing major doubts. I've listened to your podcast show for long enough that I know I cannot trust my feelings. So some nights I lie awake worrying that I am about to end a relationship with one of the most easy to get along with guys I've ever met. A guy who could well become the kind of husband who would one day help me with chores and get up in the night with a crying baby. Some of my friends think I'm crazy to consider walking away. He's really easy to get along with. But Rabbi, I have to tell you that with every nice thing he does, I'm finding him less and less attractive. Is there something wrong with me? Am I going to wreck my life by letting this one go and finding a really bad boy to replace him? How can I explain that I'm ending a relationship because the guy is too nice and too agreeable? It sounds mad. He's soft-spoken and super easygoing, not caring where we go or what we do. It's so hard to decide. He's kind and sometimes makes me laugh and he has good values. So I feel like a spoiled brat whenever I start planning to end it. What's wrong with me not wanting to be with a guy because he's too nice? And it's signed Jennifer. So, Jennifer, I am so sorry for the predicament in which you find yourself. Your instincts and concerns are absolutely right and very valid. Is your hesitation really related to his niceness? Or is it more about an absence of initiative and drive and ambition? You see, you have a need, as do most women, to feel safe and to feel protected in the presence of a man. And there's a part of you that's wondering whether or not he is able to handle the world. Look, there is such a thing called masculine and feminine. There's such a thing as man and woman. There is not such a thing as transgender. There just isn't. And all of us are either man or woman. And men typically have more masculine energy and less feminine energy. And most women, for the most part, have more feminine energy and less masculine energy. But yes, of course, there are women who do have a great deal of masculine energy, and there are also men who have a lot of feminine energy. And so what that means is that most women desire a man who radiates masculinity and makes them feel safe and makes them feel protected, which is part of what masculinity is with respect to femininity. Most men want a woman who will nurture and, let me say, be a good receiver. And what I mean by that is that the actual physical and biological realities of gender reflect a great deal of truth on the spiritual realities of gender as well. And that means that men in general are projectors. Men put out and women receive. And if you think about that, it is applicable on a sociological and on an emotional level, not just on a biological and physical level. And so masculine energy means active, ambitious, initiating, right? Being the driver. And feminine energy, much less so. And that, I think, should be reasonably clear. What is less clear, of course, is that these are realities, that these are what masculinity is and what femininity is. There are many men who are less masculine and tend to be more feminine, and there are women the other way around, just as I said earlier. But in general, the masculine man is what women like. And what you're describing here is a man who, it's not his niceness that is bothering you. It's that you are sensing too little drive, too little initiative, too little ambition, and you gave that away when you said that he was fine going anywhere or doing anything. And I suspect that you would agree if I said that most times it turns out that you are the one who decide what you're going to be doing as a couple, where you're going, or whatever it is that you're going to be doing. That is exactly part of what we're discussing. No, it's not that you're objecting to his being nice. What you really would like is a strong man who is also capable of being nice and who radiates a gentleness where necessary. Women find the picture of a strong, masculine-looking man tenderly cradling a baby to be almost irresistible. It's a very appealing picture because it is, in essence, an ideal. But it's not that easily attainable, because the default condition for men is one or the other. I don't know if you've ever handled a motorcycle resting on its rest and the front wheel is off the ground, and if it's unlocked you can turn the handlebars, and one of the things you discover is that the handlebars tend to pull towards either full left lock or full right lock. But holding the wheel in the middle, the straight ahead position, is a little bit harder. Now, fortunately, when you're actually riding, that doesn't manifest itself in the same way. But it's always struck me from my motorcycle enthusiasm as a good metaphor for the tendency towards one extreme or the other. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that the default condition for boys growing up without acculturation, without a mother and a father parenting them, the natural condition for boys growing up is fully one way or fully the other. What are the two directions? I think of them as thug or wimp. A boy is likely to either grow up very unmasculine, very feminine, very unassertive, very wimpy, for lack of a better term, and alternatively, he is likely to grow up in a very brutal and thuggish way. And you only have to look around our society to, in fact, see that this is one of the dilemmas facing women today who wish to put their faith in one man alongside of whom to walk through life. And they look around, and what they see are wimps or thugs. Neither one is a really good choice. And what Jennifer who wrote the letter with which I started today's show, what she has there is a wimp. You know, God bless him, and I wish him well, but he really needs to listen to the Rabbi Daniel Lapin show. And he needs to listen to many of these shows. And he needs to read some of the books in which we discuss this stuff, because he really does need to make a huge change in who he is. But first of all, why are there so many wimps? As to why there are so many thugs, that is an easier one to explain. And the answer to that is because there is a very large number of men today who grow up, who come of age without a father. And what they discover is that the world in which they find themselves is a rough world, and the only way to manifest their masculinity is by thuggishness. Because for a man to not feel like a man is incredibly painful, more painful than any woman can actually appreciate. But what about the wimpy men? How do they manage? Surely they recognize that they lack masculinity? The answer is that yes, they do, but they interpret it as being a good person. They see themselves as being less pushy and less likely to share the undesirable masculine traits. They are better at getting on with people. Well, yes, that is absolutely true. And most women are far better at getting on with people than most men, because being easy to get on with is a feminine characteristic. With men, to be that way means that you are concealing and suppressing your own feelings. But why are there so many wimps? What is going on in the society? Well, let me give you a little bit of a theory on this. Now, part of it is, it doesn't need a theory, part of it is that so many men are raised without fathers that they become focused on their early years on pleasing mum or grandma or whoever are the women in their lives. But when there's not a man in their life, yes, they do become that way. And sometimes, because this problem has been going on already for more than 50 years, it's very possible that their fathers were wimps, and that's how they grew up. So this is a widely spread problem. And again, I'm not. I don't mean to be using this term derogatorily, because I know that. I wish no happy warriors were wimps, but it's unavoidable. I know that without question, some of the men listening to this show are going to look at themselves and say, "Oh no, he's describing me." And so I'm certainly not saying that a wimp is a bad person or an evil person. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm saying a wimp, I don't mean that word derogatorily. I just don't have a better word. But what I mean is that it is a man who is not fulfilling anywhere close to all his potential. Because for a man to achieve all his potential, he needs to be masculine. And the good news is this is repairable. It really is. But the first step, obviously, is to recognize that you are a man who is a little bit too feminine, not enough masculine in you. Totally changeable. This is not a case of hormone therapy, testosterone injection. No, nothing like that at all. This is in reality, it's a spiritual condition. And the women in your lives, or the women who are to be in your lives, will appreciate you fixing it. Because the fact is that it is frustrating for most women to live with a feminine man. And because nature abhors a vacuum, and that means that not only in the world of physics, where if you create a vacuum, and do you know there are wine cork pullers, which are like hypodermic syringes. You push a needle through the cork, and then you pressure the piston a few times with your thumb, and what that does is compress air into the wine bottle, which gradually forces the cork up and out of the bottle. It's very elegant, actually. I do not know whether winophiles, that means people who really know a lot about wines, and that is not me, I'm afraid. But I don't know what winophiles think of such a cork puller, or not really a corkscrew. But what I do know is that every now and then somebody tries one of those, not on a wine bottle, but on some liqueur bottle that's been bottled in a square-shaped bottle instead of a round bottle, a bottle with a square cross-section. And after a few presses of the plunger, the bottle smashes. It just bursts out and explodes, because a round bottle, on the basis of the engineering qualities of an eggshell, a round bottle is much stronger than a bottle with 4 corners and 4 sides. And the reverse is true as well. If you suck a vacuum, if you suck all the air out of a bottle, if it's a round bottle, you'll be able to get quite a good vacuum there. But if you try to do it with a square bottle, the outside air pressure, once you've pulled out a lot of the air from inside the square-shaped bottle, the outside air pressure pushes on the square sides and quite easily smashes them, because nature does not like a vacuum. And so the same is true also in terms of a power vacuum. It's true in international affairs, and it's true also in domestic affairs. And that is that there needs to be somebody in the relationship who is driving it. Now, this is not true in a business partnership, but it is true in a marriage. And again, I do believe this is one of the reasons that the good Lord created us with a man physically bigger than the woman. Not because he needs to use or should use his strength in a physical way, but simply that the size of him suggests, hey, I'm in charge. I will take responsibility. Now, what do I mean? I just want to clarify, right? I'm not talking in any tyrannical sense, God forbid at all. But I'm talking about if, here you are, you're driving down the road with your husband, it's late at night, and all of a sudden there is a loud bang, and the car jerks, and your husband is behind the wheel, and he immediately puts his foot on the brake and guides the car to the side of the road, and then when he's no longer focused single-mindedly on bringing the car safely to a standstill, he says to you, we've just had a front wheel blowout. And he knows that, right? He didn't say, I wonder what that was. What happened? Because he knows that when the steering wheel pulls to the side after a big bang and the car doesn't handle properly, one of the front tires blew out. That's what happened. A man knows these things. Now, he could say, relax, honey, sit down. I need to get out and get the jack. I'm going to have to change the wheel. That may be what he says. Or maybe he picks up his phone and says, I've got AAA on speed dial, and I'm sure I'll have him here in a few minutes. And he calls him up, and one way or another, he takes charge and solves the problem. That's what most women want in a husband. And a blown front tire is just a metaphor for life in general. That's what it is. You don't want to be married to a guy who says, I wonder what that was. What are we going to do now? That's not what you want. And it's not what your daughter wants. There is an excitement in masculine-feminine tension. And it's something that blessed people have discovered. If you are a masculine man and you're married to a feminine woman, you probably have bald spots in the carpet next to your bed from putting your knees there in gratitude every single night and thanking the Lord for giving you such a wonderful spouse. And if you're a woman and you're married to a man from whom you feel masculine tension and masculine energy emanating, then that's wonderful for you as well. It is a good thing. The creativity possible in a male-female relationship is intensified and augmented when there is a difference, when one is masculine and one is feminine, there is a power that does flow out of that. Now, before I tell you what's been going on over the last 60 years or so and why it is that there are so many men lacking in full masculinity. And again, I repeat, this is totally repairable. Right, this is like somebody, who as a teenager had a lot of pimples on his face, had a lot of acne. He doesn't just say, well, I guess I'm an acneed person. No, he solves the problem. He a person breaks a leg, he goes to the doctor, the orthopedic surgeon has it set in plaster. You repair things. And so if there is a man who is not, for various reasons in his background, fully masculinized and is lacking in some of that, it's repairable. That's the good news. But first of all, before I go into that in greater depth, let me urge you to visit the website, rabbidaniellapin.com. And here's what you should think about doing at the website. First of all, if you haven't yet read The Holistic You, which is a free downloadable ebook you can get right away, then you should definitely do that. You should also decide about trying a test membership as a member of the Happy Warriors community. You can try that out. Free trial for a period, 2 weeks or so. See whether that works for you. And finally, you should also take a look at the online program called Scrolling Through Scripture. Okay, those are some of the things that you definitely want to do on the website of rabbidaniellapin.com. So, what is the theory that I'm looking at? Okay, well, first of all, I have to tell you that at different stages of a woman's monthly cycle, she undergoes very real changes. And interestingly enough, at the time of ovulation, when a woman is most fertile, most capable of conceiving a child, she has a different outlook, and it's all subconscious. Women at that stage apparently seek out or are attracted towards masculinity. Now, I don't know a whole lot about this, and I can't even guarantee that this will not end up being debunked and discredited. I don't know. But at the moment, I'm aware, and I have been for many years already, because the first information on this that I'm aware of came out in 2005. And that was from the National Institutes of Health, and it's found in the U.S. National Library of Medicine. And this was a study from October 2005 that made this point. They tested and found that women were drawn to masculinity during the time they were ovulating, particularly more strongly. And then again in 2010, October 2010, in Live Science, there were more reports and studies that were printed. 2014, again, it came up in Medical News Today, and many, many other places as well. The research, some of it took place at the University of Southern California, some of it in different countries. But you know how it is when a particular topic becomes in and becomes even a little trendy. So a lot of different people in a lot of different places start looking at it, and at the moment it does seem to be fairly reliable. That at the time in a woman's cycle of ovulation, she feels sexier and she's drawn towards masculinity, if you like. Now, all of that is pretty straightforward. That's right. Just over 60 years ago, the birth control pill came into existence. And there it was. On May the 9th, 1960, the Food and Drug Administration approved the pill. And so that's like 60 years ago. Came out, it was the very first one, I think it was called Enovid, if I'm not mistaken. And the way it worked was fairly straightforward. It used hormones like progesterone and estrogen to repress ovulation in women. That's exactly what it did. It made women not ovulate. Well, obviously, if there's no ovulation, there can be no conception. Hey, presto, birth control pill. You got it. Now, that means that in a way that was quite different before, in a way that was unknown before 1960, right? There was birth control before, but it was mechanical birth control that did not interfere with the monthly cycle of women. But the birth control pill did. And so from May 1960, and I think you'll see now why I regularly identify the early 1960s as the most critical time to mark a new epoch in American history. It's not only because of the birth control pill. There were many other things that took place at the same time, and I've spoken about those in the past. But what's interesting now is that a certain proportion of American women stopped ovulating for a large part of the time. You know, not all women were on the pill, and not all women of childbearing age were on the pill, and not all women who were on the pill all the time. But let's put it this way: if statistically speaking, you know, we could easily draw up a mathematical expression that would say that until 1960, an American male walking the streets of American cities, going to work and going to restaurants and going about his business, was going to encounter X number of women ovulating at any particular time. After May 1960, and the numbers grew very rapidly, very quickly after that, we now know that that number X is far lower, right? Pretty obvious, because if a large number of women are on the pill, then a large number of women are not ovulating at all, and therefore men were less likely to run into women who were ovulating. Well, what's that got to do with anything? Well, the way that I want to say natural selection, but I don't really mean this in a Darwinian style, although there are aspects of it that could apply. But what I'm saying is that always, in every society, men are very much shaped by women. What do I mean by that? Well, in the same as Camille Paglia says that if there were no men in the world, women would still be living in grass huts and caves. And she does say that, and there's, humorous as it is, there's a lot of truth in it, because the tough, hard, dangerous work of construction is usually work that men seek out, not women. Would women do it in the absence of men? This takes us into the realm of speculation beyond where I want to go today. But if it is true that without men in the world, women would still be living in grass huts and in caves, then I think it's also true to say that if there were no women in the world, then men would also be living in caves or on the beach or in grass huts, because we, to a large extent, are motivated by women. And I do not mean this in a base way, and I don't mean this in a primitive way at all. I mean that the desire to be accepted by a woman and to be the one for whom she creates a home and the one to whom she gives babies, that is something that ranks very highly. And so it's not an accident that on dating programs, on dating software and dating programs out there, it's not an accident that we know that men lie most about their income and their height, because height is to some extent a measure of masculinity, and income is a measure of ability to provide. It moves the man up the socioeconomic ranking scale, if you like. And so men tend to lie about those things because they want to be viewed as valuable, right? To women, of course. So that is a very real thing, that we men do want to please women, and we want to be admired by women, and above all, we want access to women. We want to be chosen by a woman, right? Well, let's now go back to pre-1960, and before the birth control pill that suppresses ovulation in 1960, as I said, the average man is going to encounter X number of women who are in the process, in the moment or in the days of ovulation, and the signals that an ovulating woman puts out is one that favors the masculine man. And so you can see what happens as a process, that men subtly get the signal that, hey, you know what? If we are more masculine, we get chosen. Women smile at us and express interest in us if we're masculine. And they get the message, and guess what? The Marlborough Man is born, and the Marlborough Man has an existence because masculinity is in demand by a certain number of women. But then comes post-1960 and in the decades after that, and now the chances of a man encountering an ovulating woman are much lower. And so the kind of man that's a woman who is not in a fertile part of her cycle might choose is much more a sort of easy to get on with guy. You follow? And so over the course of many years, and it has been 60 years that this has been going on, since men encounter fewer fertile women, they encounter fewer women who give encouragement to masculinity, and therefore, since masculinity is energy draining, I mean, there's no question about it, to be a masculine man does take effort. No, so much easier, no question, so much easier to sit back and say, what should we do? As opposed to saying, don't worry, I got this. And so the natural tendency of men was to slide down the scale a little away from masculinity. Look, I'm sure you get the idea. I don't want to over dwell on this. It's a very, very strange thing, but it helps understand. When you mess with biology, there are long-term social effects. And so if you bring about circumstances so that large numbers of women are infertile for longer periods of time, you are going to apparently get some kind of effect in society. And guess what? That is exactly what we got. And so I'm stressing, if I may, that this isn't necessarily the only explanation or the only reason. A lot of it has to do with many men raised only by mothers. A lot of it has to do with men raised by fathers who themselves tended a little away from the masculine. But whatever it is, we've got ourselves, into a time now where if you are a woman looking to form a relationship and ultimately be married, it's harder now because you'd like to marry a masculine man, which means you'd like to marry a man who is ambitious and driven and a man who can lead. You would like that. In fact, as you know, I have said many times in the past that in general, the majority of women would like to be married to a man who is taller than they are, richer than they are, and smarter than they are. That's just a reality. So here we are now with what we've got, and we're facing a world in which, because of the various reasons I've explored, there happen to be more men that are a little further down the scale, or a little away from masculinity, a little bit towards femininity, than there used to be. And all you got to do is think about how American television programming changed at, again, this period, the beginning of the 1960s. Go back to something like the Donna Reed show. you remember Donna was married to Alex Stone? Was that their name, I think? And this ran from 1958 to 1966. So it's a good example that by 1966, we're 6 years into the 60s, the birth control pill and everything else that's happening, and the show is no longer applicable. But what was it about? Well, I mean, you got to just go back and look at old episodes of the Donna Reed show, and you see that Alex is a very masculine man. Not just in appearance, but in how he is the pillar of the family. He just is. And Donna, you can't imagine a more feminine-looking woman. Now, I know that it is popular and customary and chic and trendy to mock that, oh, well, she made a point of making sure to greet her husband when he came home from work, in heels and wearing a necklace. Fine, mock as much as you like, but most men wouldn't mind being married to Donna Reed. And then there was, do you remember Leave It to Beaver? No, you're not going to remember. I don't either. I wasn't even in the United States. But that ran from 1957 to 1963. And again, same thing. June and Ward Cleaver were the parents. And, June is totally feminine. And Ward, Ward served in the army. I think he was a construction engineer, and I forget what he does during the time of the show. But at any rate, again, he's the father, and he takes responsibility, and he carries the family in every way. And I should mention, looking both at Donna Reed show and Leave It to Beaver, that one of the drawbacks, ladies, of being married to a feminine man, and again, I'm talking just about types here, a man who is less, means that he's less comfortable disciplining kids, particularly boys, but even girls. He's less comfortable doing that, and that means that you end up having to do more of it. The old expression that a mother would say to her children during the day, just wait till your father comes home, that really resonated, because you could count on a masculine man to take care of his children's education. If they needed to be put right, he was right there. And a man who lacks that quality, and remember, part of being a masculine man is you're willing to express something that needs to be expressed, even if it's going to provoke confrontation, even if it's going to cause unhappiness. One of the ways to know if you are a wimpy man is you have a tendency to avoid confrontation. You want to make people happy instead of simply saying yes or no, or saying this is unacceptable, this has to change. That requires masculinity. You've got to be able to project. You've got to be able to put out. You've got to be able to insert into the situation your input. But a wimpy man is uncomfortable doing that. So, at any rate, so the Leave It to Beaver ends about 1963. The Donna Reed show ends about 66. And what do they get replaced with? Now, I'm not an expert on American popular culture by any means, but I am trying to make a point. And so if I may be slightly off in something, I apologize. But what shows like the Donna Reed show, which was a masculine husband and a feminine wife, or Leave It to Beaver, masculine husband and feminine wife, what that gets replaced by is something like Married with Children, where dad is Al Bundy, dim-witted, incompetent, foolish, and that ran from 1987 to 1997. So that's well into the period already, and it's totally different. His wife was also not very impressive. So that was Married with Children, where the father. But that's not all. Do you remember Homer Simpson? Right, an incredibly popular show, very viable. In general, these men are all lazy, incompetent, and stupid. They are buffoons. This happens onwards and onwards and onwards. As late as 2012, there was a Huggies commercial, you might remember, which again depicted Dad as utterly incompetent and foolish. Saying that the hardest test that could ever put a baby's diaper to would be for father to have to deal with it, that sort of thing. A masculine guy can change a diaper. He certainly can. Anyways, I think it's reasonably clear, I hope it is, that something did change in America in the early 60s. Be that as it may, and whatever the causes are and whenever the exact date was, bottom line is that many men today are infected with wimpiness. That many men are infected with thuggishness, it goes without saying. That's obvious. You only have to look at the violent crime statistics to know that. We know that, and fortunately, I think most smart women understand the importance of staying away from men who veered towards that end. In other words, if a boy is not being raised diligently and meticulously and wisely, then by himself he's going to default to one of two conditions, either the thug or the wimp. Neither is very good for society. Neither is very good for the women who end up in the orbits of those men. So back to you, Jennifer, with your letter. Your instincts are absolutely right, and having noticed it, I wouldn't be at all surprised if by now you've already ended it, even without my recommendation, because it was going to continue irritating you and bothering you, regardless of what your parents said. Your parents want to see you with a good person, but there are good men who are masculine as well. Admittedly, harder to find. And if you are in your own child-rearing years, either as a father or a mother, it is so important to raise a man correctly, to raise a boy to be a man, not a thug or a wimp. It's not at all easy, I can tell you that. But the reward, the human reward for doing that is immense. It's beyond measure. Now, in the same way that I gladly accept life lessons from anybody who has something to teach that's true and is wise, whether that person is a tennis player or a racing car driver or an accountant or a bus driver, it just doesn't matter, because wisdom that is wise and true is useful. And my wisdom happens to come from ancient Jewish wisdom. And so regardless of whether you are Jewish or not, the bottom line is that you should be able to hear this and decide whether this is wise, whether it's true, whether it's applicable. Now, in case you might be interested in, like, where about does this come from? Where do we know it about? I'll be happy to tell you. And again, I recommend, well, there's a Bible I recommend, Rabbi Daniel Lapin's recommended Bible. Whether you are a Bible-believing person or not, whether you are Jewish or Christian, it doesn't matter. I can't imagine in this day and age that anybody would have a home library, even if your library is a modest one shelf of books. I can't imagine how anybody would have a home library without a Bible. And that just doesn't make any sense to me at all. The book has been more influential than any other book in the history of the world. The book has been printed more copies than any other book in the history of the world. So not to have access to it at all makes no sense. And so if you haven't yet got yourself a Bible, please go to my website at rabbidaniellapin.com and just order yourself a copy of Rabbi Daniel Lapin's recommended Bible. And you'll see it right there. And there's a reason it's recommended. One of them is that it uses the exact Hebrew names for people. And so Moses isn't Moses, he is Moshe. with the correct original Hebrew pronunciation, which I think is valuable because there are certain things one can conclude and interpret from recognizing certain sounds in people's names. And again, I explain all of that in Scrolling Through Scripture, the online program I've spoken to you about. But if you want to get yourself a copy of Rabbi Daniel Lapin's recommended Bible, you should do so, and then I will walk you through quickly, for those of you who are interested, where this comes from in the Bible. Okay, so in Genesis chapter 25, verse 20, we discover that Isaac, Yitzchak, Abraham's son, the firstborn Hebrew, is 40 years old when he gets married. 20 years later, he has twin boys, Yaakov and Esav. And he's 60 years old when that happens. That's chapter 25 of Genesis, verse 26. And then what happens is we're told these two boys, these twins, are very different from one another. Yaakov, Jacob, is described as a simple guy who likes hanging around the tent. And Esav is described as cunning and a hunter. So who is the masculine guy and who's the feminine guy here, right? Fairly easy to see. It's quite clear that Esav walked away with most of the testosterone, and Yaakov has most of the estrogen. Putting it in contemporary terms, okay? I'm oversimplifying to a great extent, but you get the idea. And then, not surprisingly, we discover one of the brothers is cooking a meal. Well, who do you think was cooking a meal in the kitchen? Well, that was Yaakov. That's right. He was cooking a meal in the kitchen. Where was Esav? He was out hunting. Came home hungry and wants food. Yaakov says, sell me the birthright. Esav says, sure, who cares about the birthright? If you'll give me a meal, I'll give you the birthright. Because he sees to Esav a world is a world that is filled only with material things. There are no spiritual things. You want me to give you a birthright in exchange for a meal? Yeah, absolutely, done. It's a deal. I mean, you're exchanging something spiritual which has no value for something material, namely a meal right now. So he does that. And then many, many years go by. There's a famine, and Isaac and Rebekah, either with or without their sons, we have no idea, goes down to the land of the Philistines. They settle in Gerar. There's a controversy later on about water rights and wells. And then we discover that Esav, the cunning hunter brother, he got married at the age of 40. So Isaac is 100 years old now when Esau gets married. That's chapter 26, verse 34. This is all a great thing to read in Genesis, by the way. And I'm just highlighting the things your eyes should pay attention to as you try and work your way through this section. Then finally, chapter 27 starts off with Isaac finally reaching old age. By the way, Isaac dies soon after at the age of 180. We know that from Genesis chapter 35, verse 28. But at any rate, in the beginning of chapter 27, Isaac is old, so he's not far off that. And at that point, he calls his oldest son, the older twin, by a few minutes. He calls Esav and says, time for me to give you a blessing. I don't know how much longer I've got. At that point, Yaakov's mom is the one who calls him and says, Yaakov, I've got a plan. There's something I need you to do. I need you to go along and get food for your dad like this and do this and wear this, and I'll tell you exactly what to say because I want you to get the blessing. So again, Yaakov, mommy's boy, in a way. We certainly know Isaac preferred the older son Esau, and so Esau's out looking for food to bring his father. Meanwhile, Rebekah, mom, gives Jacob the food to take into father, and father gives Jacob the whole blessing. And then later on, Esav comes back, and is horrified to discover that his brother has taken the blessing, completely forgetting, by the way, that that's what he sold. Right? He didn't value the birthright blessing back then, But now all of a sudden he's mad that Jacob took it, Yaakov took it. He's upset as all could be. So Yitzchak and Rivka, the parents, mom and dad, say to Jacob, your brother is going to kill you. And again, he verges towards the thuggish end of things. Does Esav, and he makes quite clear what he's going to be doing to Yaakov. So the parents send Yaakov away on a journey to Rebekah's brother's house, and she goes. So Yaakov goes on a trip. On the way there, he has a vision. This is Genesis chapter 28, verses 11 through 16. He dreams, and he has a vision of greatness. And all of a sudden, we now see Father Isaac's blessing beginning to take effect. Father Isaac's blessing was for the son whom he thought was Esau to become more powerful and more effective, and to eventually be his main son, the main person carrying on his line. You remember Yaakov later gets renamed Israel. And so the children of Israel are going to be the children of Yaakov's son. He thought it was going to be Esau. Turns out that through mom's intervention, Jacob is the one who gets the blessing inadvertently, and as a result, he is the one now who acquires these powers. And look what happens. You watch in front of your astonished eyes, you actually watch Jacob become powerful. You see him acquiring his masculinity, if you like. And he begins to see himself as great. And then he arrives at the well, and the other shepherds say to him, we can't start watering. In order to make sure that everything is fair, we have a huge, heavy rock on top of the mouth of the well, and it's so big and heavy that we can only move it when everyone has gathered, all the shepherds have gathered. And so we're waiting. Just then, Jacob's beautiful cousin Rachel arrives with her father's sheep, and Jacob jumps up and puts his shoulder against this massive boulder blocking the well, and he pushes it aside. Right? Chapter 29, verses 8, 9, 10. And so we see now, this is very far from the Jacob we met at the time he was born at the beginning. Chapter 25, verse 27, he was just a man, a simple guy who hung around the tent. No, this is a guy who says to the shepherds, I don't care about what you say. I'm rolling the stone off the well because I want to impress my young cousin. And that's exactly what he does. And then he does something which, again, does not appear to be at all wimpy. Not only does he roll the stone off the well, but he grabs Rachel and plants a great big kiss right on her lips. And I say right on her lips because the Hebrew text is very clear that this was a deep, deep, real kiss. Then he offers to work for his uncle Laban, and Laban says, yes, what do you want? And he says, well, I would like your younger daughter Rachel. I want her as a wife. And so he works those years, and eventually Genesis chapter 29, verse 21, and I hope your English translation that you use has this correctly, but if you're using my recommended Bible, then it will say it correctly. He astonishingly uses language which is incredibly masculine and provocative. What does he say? He says to his father-in-law, he says, give me my wife now that I may come into her. That's pretty direct. You don't get more direct than that. Again, not the way we would have thought Jacob would have spoken. This is what we would have expected from Esau. But don't forget, Jacob got the blessing intended for Esau, which ends up making him very Esau-like. And so he marries Rachel. And then, if you don't mind, because people around the neighborhood, according to ancient Jewish wisdom, people around the neighborhood always used to say, oh, Isaac and Rebekah have 2 sons, and Laban has 2 daughters. And so you know what's going to happen? Esau is going to marry Leah, the older daughter, and Jacob, the younger son, is going to marry Rachel, the younger daughter. And so now, because Jacob has acquired Esau's blessing, he not only marries Rachel, but he also marries Leah. Because of the machinations of his father-in-law, he ends up essentially becoming Esau, if you like, or essentially becoming that figure, that masculine, powerful figure of drive, ambition, initiative, and vision, capable of becoming the father of the people of Israel. And so that's why they're called the children of Israel, just another way of saying the children of Jacob. That is what it is. Now, this doesn't mean to say that in today's modern world, women cannot be directors and supervisors. I'm just saying that it's more natural and easygoing for a man. Many women are uncomfortable in roles of supervisory roles because it is not a traditional or typical attribute of femininity to direct other people, to tell them what to do. And for this reason, when women do end up in supervisory roles, many of them do very, very well. But it comes at some kind of psychic and emotional cost. Women speak and write of their discomfort at having to discipline people, having to fire people, having to supervise and tell people what to do. It doesn't come easily and naturally to women. That is more of a masculine attribute. And so again, if a man is feeling over these things, then he's probably a man who could use some of the injection of masculinity to boost that part of himself, right? We are human beings, we're not animals. That means we're not just who we are. A while back, a year or two ago, I did a podcast show on how dangerous are the words to even think, let alone say, look, I am who I am. You never want to say that. We human beings are never, I am who I am. We are always capable of immense growth and immense ability to confront new challenges and to change and to develop. These are huge abilities that the human being has, and we must never forget it. In exactly the same way that women have become more masculinized. Today I've been focusing on the cultural trends that have resulted in men becoming more feminized. But there's no question the opposite is also true. Women have become far more masculinized. And again, you only have to look at the depiction of women in popular culture, in magazine advertisements, contrast pre-1960 to now, and you see this now in exactly the same way, that it is possible, and I've done programs teaching women to find fulfillment in femininity. Now, it's not easy, there's no question about it. And part of femininity means letting your man be a man, which is very difficult because sometimes people get married where in a situation where at that point in time the woman is more accomplished and is more competent, and the natural tendency then is for her to exert that competence, and the natural tendency is for her husband to sort of back off and let her assume those roles. Nature abhors a vacuum. And so very often marriages can be incredibly enhanced in every way. Financially, spiritually, physically, marriages can be enormously enhanced if both the wife and the husband work on enhancing their femininity and masculinity respectively, reverting back to being real women and real men. Fortunately, this can all be done. And but focusing today on the masculine side of things, yeah, there are absolutely things that men who feel that for whatever reason in their past, and in all probability it does have to do with the relationship with your father, the relationship between your father and mother, those early childhood years do really have an impact. But whatever the cause, many men today do feel that they are on the wimpy end of the spectrum. Now, you don't want to become a thug at the other end of the spectrum, but you want to be in the middle, and you want to be a very strong masculine man, capable of goodness and tenderness and gentleness, but also capable of strength and the exertion of strength and the projection of power when that is necessary. Everybody is capable of change, and it's a beautiful thing about us. I want to now give you 3 steps, 3 strategies for beginning to cure the wimpy factor and to reclaim masculinity as something that is part of the fulfillment of your life, your being. It's not comprehensive. There's a limit to what we can do in a short podcast, but at least become aware of these 3 areas in which you could start working if you feel you are somebody who would like to recover that part of your personality, that part of your being that God intended for you to have. Basically, you were created as a man. Okay, so number one, I recommend that you do some thinking about your day-to-day life during the course of a typical week. You might even choose to actually keep a record now for the next week, and you need to choose an area, or maybe 2 areas or 3, but not more, where you've gone against your own wishes, or what you know to be right. You've gone against what you think ought to be done, but you've done it in order to get along, to agree with people, to avoid what could be an unpleasant confrontation. Maybe it's a child of yours saying, will I be able to get a bicycle for Christmas, or whatever it is, and you say maybe, instead of saying we're not doing big presents for Christmas this year. That would be an example, but there are many others. It might be in family, it might be between spouses, it might be wherever it is. Try and find 2 or 3 places in the recent past where you have done that, and now look out for the week ahead. Try and spot places where you are not telling the truth, or you're sugarcoating the truth, or you're agreeing to something that you don't want to agree to, even though you know it's wrong. But you do it in order to avoid a fight, to avoid confrontation, to get along. That's key. Right? So it's worthwhile spending a little time and catching yourself do it, right? Because that's fundamental to change. You can't possibly lose weight if you don't keep track of those midnight raids on the refrigerator. You've got to be able to look at yourself from the outside looking in. You're an observer overhead. Watch yourself and catch those occasions during the course of your day or several days or week where you don't say what you know you should say, or you may even lie. But the idea is, I just don't want to have a fight. I'm not ready for confrontation. You know what? Then there's going to be an argument. The person will say, well, why not? You got to deal with that. Part of masculinity is dealing with that. The second thing I want to ask you to try is to focus on language. And what I mean by this is, try and use to start declarations or sentences with the word I instead of the word